Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, James Watson, co-discoverer of the double helix structure of DNA, and also probably the most famous scientist in the world. Plus an award-winning filmmaker who lost her mother on 9/11. But we begin with Ireland, which has a new Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, who was sworn in on Wednesday to head a coalition of his party, Fine Gael, and Labour. Ireland, of course, is still in the grip of a financial crisis, propped up by a €65 billion loan from the EU and the IMF. All this for a country dubbed the Celtic Tiger for its high growth in the years before the global financial meltdown. One of Enda Kenny's first jobs will be to try to renegotiate the terms of that massive loan. John Bruton is a former Prime Minister of Ireland, or Taoiseach as it's known, and he's with us right now. Welcome, John. It's very good to have you with us.
Thanks very much, David.
What about the agenda for Fine Gael and Labour right now? I mean, what should it prioritise? I mean, well, I suppose it's something financial, isn't it? But
well, first of all, I think it has got to try to regain the country's economic independence, because we're now in a situation where all the important decisions have to be approved in Brussels and in Washington, and that's not something that Irish people like to find themselves being in that position. So that requires, a programme of austerity. Also, I think they've got to negotiate with the European Union and the IMF to get a lower interest rate on the money that has been advanced to us.
Do you think they can do that? I mean, they seem reluctant to do that.
Indeed.
Angela Merkel seems very reluctant, for instance.
This is a negotiation, and obviously people are going to take hard positions to give themselves space. I think a solution will be found, maybe not immediately, but over time. But also, I think we've got to recognise that the problem that Ireland is facing today is just a symptom of a wider European banking problem. Because if one or two of the Irish banks had collapsed back in 2008, that would have had a knock-on effect and would probably have led to collapses of banks in Germany and in Belgium and in Britain as well. A sort of contagion that one had during the Great Depression. So, in a sense, by stopping the rot in Ireland, one has saved Europe's banks from a bigger problem. And that's why I think there needs to be a European banking policy and a European solution found to the banking problems that are manifesting themselves in Ireland and in Spain and in other countries.
But Irish people, from all one hears and reads and so on, are quite angry about this situation. They feel that Ireland has been unfairly punished in a way.
Well, they're angry in the first place with their own government, and obviously we've seen an election result where the previous government has been ejected from office and reduced in size dramatically. They're angry with their own regulators, they're angry with themselves because many Irish people borrowed money they shouldn't have done. But they also feel that in a way this was only possible because we had free capital movement throughout Europe. And that tended to have the money going to where the returns were highest. And a lot of people outside Ireland invested in the Irish property bubble because they thought they could make a quick return through their banks. And that means that, in a sense, if there's to be a fair solution found to this, it has to be a European solution that clearly imposes a great part of the weight on Ireland itself, but where the weight of the burden is shared.
Should the ECB, the European Central Bank, or banks in other countries have been more alert? Did they know what was going on and ignore it, or did they just not know what was going on?
Well, I think they couldn't but have known, because it was widely advertised that property prices were shooting through the roof in Ireland, that money was being borrowed in Ireland on a scale unprecedented, and that it was going mainly into one sector, construction, which is very volatile. Everybody knew that. But the banks went on lending from outside Ireland as well as from within Ireland into this situation, aggravating it. Those banks were supervised by their own central banks in Britain and Germany and places like that. And the overall common money market was supervised by the European Central Bank, which had power to issue instructions to the Central Bank in Ireland to stop this, but seemingly didn't do so.
And so the central bank, the banks here in Ireland, are also to blame, obviously.
Oh, they're the most to blame. I mean, the primary blame has to rest with Ireland itself. But there's a secondary secondary responsibility that is shared.
Is it conceivable that there might need to be a second bailout?
I don't think so. I think that Ireland can live within the current situation. There is an issue about how you supposedly stress test a bank. Well, all stress tests involve making assumptions about the value of assets. Now, if any institution were to sell all its assets on the same day into a market where nobody could pay, the assets would be virtually worthless. So it all depends on what assumptions you make about what time you're allowing people to sell the assets over, and that sort of thing. So stress tests are going to take place, but they will either be very good depending on the assumptions that are made, or they could be engineered depending on the assumptions to look very bad. So I think we've got to give time to this situation to work itself out rather than demand instant solutions.
And in terms of the euro, I mean, it seemed when everything was booming in Dublin and so on that the euro had been a great blessing. In retrospect now, was it a mistake to get involved in the euro?
I don't think it was a mistake to get involved in the euro. I think the euro is an essential part, and has been from the very beginning, an essential part of building a structure of peace in Europe by making the European economies dependent on one another and therefore incapable of going to war again. And that's the underlying reason for all of this European construction. But the lesson we have to learn is that if you have a single money market, which we've had since 1990, you've got to have a single system to supervise it and to ensure that localized bubbles don't arise. And that if you have a common interest rate, that interest rate takes into account the needs of all of the countries and not just one or two countries.
And what about the interest rate, 5.8%? Do you think there's a sporting chance in the upcoming meetings and so on that will be reduced?
I hope so, but I would think that is more likely to happen over 6 months to a year, because until we get clarity as to whether other countries might be availing of the fund that Ireland and Greece are currently availing of, it may be premature to reduce the rate or to reduce it by much. Whereas in a year's time, if the situation has stabilised, and has stabilised as a result of good decision making on other issues taking place this month, then a considerably lower interest rate would be more feasible.
But are people in Ireland at the moment looking at, not relaxedly but reluctantly, at the thought that the lower tax rates have to rise?
I don't think there's any question really of the corporation tax rate, which is 12.5%, being increased, because this policy of low corporate taxation in Ireland dates back to 1956. That's before the European Union was even brought into being. It's been a policy to attract foreign direct investment that we've been following for half a century or more. To ask Ireland to reverse that policy, which is the foundation of its economic growth, at a time when you're asking them also to repay some money, just wouldn't make sense. So I think the rate will not be increased. There are arguments about the tax base. There certainly will be increases in other taxes in Ireland, apart from corporation tax, property tax, water taxation. Various other tax increases are being indicated by the incoming government. And I think also you're going to see significant reductions, very significant reductions in public spending in Ireland.
So what does the future hold then, economically, for Ireland? And what's the crucial achievement there has to be?
I think Ireland is going through a phase now where it has to become much more competitive. It lost its competitiveness over the last 8 or 10 years. It now has to regain it. But other countries have gone through that sort of mechanism. Germany and Sweden, for example, have gone through phases when they had to, reduce their living standards. But at the end of that period, they became almost miracle economies. Germany is now another miracle economy. But that was a result of very hard slog that they had to go through 8 or 10 years ago. I hope that that'll be the same story for Ireland, that 10 years from now we'll be talking about how the Irish economy has revived as a result of facing up to its problems. Perhaps too late, perhaps reluctantly, but facing up to its problems all the same.
And from what you just said there, you hope that in 10 years' time anyway, Irish eyes will be smiling.
Well, they're still smiling. We're smiles through the rain.
Thank you so much,
Thank
John.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
He is almost certainly the most famous living scientist. In 1953, the then 25-year-old James Watson, with his collaborator Francis Crick, announced that they had discovered the double helix structure of DNA, the building block of life. The discovery led not only to a Nobel Prize for the pair, but also began a whole new field of science, really, genetics, which over the years has led to massive hopes and one or two dashed dreams as well. James Watson himself has remained in the public eye, not least with some very contentious remarks he made some 4 years ago, linking intelligence and genetics to the toxic subject of race. So not only the most famous scientist, he's also one of the most controversial. And is with us now the eminently quotable James Watson. James, welcome. It's very good to have you with us.
I'm very pleased to have finally met you.
Yes, and vice versa. Having admired your work, not fully understood it brilliantly, but admired your work over the years. Here's a quote that I found among the reading ones that I thought was an intriguing quote of yours, which was, "The luckiest thing that ever happened to me is that my father didn't believe in God." What were you thinking of at that moment?
That truth came from, the laws of physics and chemistry, and there was a chance we'd find them. Rather than believing, that God made the world and let everything happen, it had to be the result of chemistry. And of course, that seems a tall order, but we surmounted a few of the mountains.
How has the world changed as a result of what you discovered with Francis Crick and so on?
Well, it hasn't changed enough, but I think it soon will.
Really? Oh, that's, why not enough? And then when
well, we haven't cured cancer.
No.
Okay, or we haven't cured mental disease or a number of things, but there's just a tremendous amount of pure knowledge which has to been accumulated since our discovery, and people are saying, you told us that everything would finally happen when we had the human genome, and now 10 years have passed, and human life hasn't changed, and you got the genome. And what I'll tell you is the next 10 years, if we really organize ourselves, almost like a war, we could banish most cancer in 10 years. I think we can.
Obviously, there is not just one form of curing cancer, is there? There's going to be several, perhaps.
The statement you hear most often is that we have to, to really cut the cancer, we've got to detect it early, and because you don't want it to progress. But I'm saying that now I'm optimistic because I think we can kill late-stage cancer. So you don't have to worry about early detection, because early detection could be, psychologically wrenching. Every time you go to the doctor and you get a test, is the test going to be good or bad? But if you could kill late-stage cancer, you don't worry about detecting it early. But people sort of assume late-stage cancer is bad. So I'm giving a talk this afternoon at the Institute of Cancer Research on Fulham Road, at the Marsden, curing incurable cancer. So, that make that your objective. And back home, I'm hosting a meeting on, quote, curing melanoma. Now, everyone knows that's incurable. Okay, so let's cure the incurable. But you've got to ask, well, why is it incurable? And we really haven't focused on it. But I think, I have a few friends who think I'm not nuts. And so you always need a few people on your side, so you're not saying everyone's against me. I don't mind if most people are against me, because that's sort of the way the world goes if you're going to really try and change it. Most people say it won't happen.
Yeah.
But you got to have a friend, and so the big event in my life was going to Cambridge now, almost 6 years ago, and meeting Francis Crick. Suddenly I had one person who thought the way I did. And so it didn't matter that everyone else thought differently.
Yeah. And that was the revelation, yes.
Well, we thought we knew how to find the structure of DNA, or we thought we had a possible route. You know, you have to have the right objective, but when you have an objective, you've got to have a map for getting there. And we had a vague map, and it proved that, you know, our map was the right way to go. And it took a year and a half, and people sort of laughed at us or were pissed off at us, or, you know, for, you know, thinking about other people's work. But they didn't believe in the path, and, you know, so we did.
And what about in 2007, your remark about inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa, because all our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours, whereas in terms of Africa, all the testing says not really. What did you have in mind there?
I didn't wish to make the remarks. I would have never gone public. I was talking to a girl who had lived in our house for a year. And I don't even remember making the remark. I remember taking her to watch me play tennis. But she'd been living in Botswana, so we went to we were talking about that. And someone had sent me a sort of forbidden book, which was called Racial Differences or Geographical Differences in IQ. And several of my friends were also sent the book, and I just read part of it. And of course, I never implied that all people of a race have the same intelligence. In Africa, you find enormous variation from very extraordinary people like Mandela to people who aren't Mandela.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
At last month's Oscars, one short documentary attracted huge attention, even gaining the backing of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, not normally known for his voting on the Oscars. It's the true story of Ashraf al-Khaled. Ashraf's wedding party in Jordan in 2005 was attacked by a suicide bomber. 27 people were killed. And the film follows Ashraf's attempt to find and confront Islamic terrorists. It didn't win the Oscar, but earned valuable publicity for the Global Survivors Network, which sponsored the film. Carie Lemack is the executive producer and also the co-founder of the Global Survivors Network. Carie, welcome. It's very good to have you with us. Tell us how your involvement in this film came about.
Well, my mother was murdered on September 11th, 2001, and after her murder, I wanted to make sure that what had happened to her and so many others, both in America and around the globe, never happens again. And I was lucky enough to represent American victims of terrorism at a UN symposium on supporting victims of terrorism in 2008. And while there, I met victims from around the globe, and we realized that the terrorists are able to speak out and have videos and messages, so why shouldn't the victims do the same thing? And that was the genesis of creating Killing in the Name. I
read somewhere that you still find references to pictures of, film of Osama bin Laden very difficult to take.
Absolutely. I think very few people think of when they look at images of terrorist attacks, whether it be 9/11, seeing the planes hit the buildings, or other images. That's the last moment for many people. When the planes hit the buildings, that's when my mom was murdered, because she was on one of those flights. And very few people realize that the debris you see in the images, that's not just parts of the building, that's parts of the people who are in the planes. And that's why they still find body parts to these days, and my mom and other people.
Let's take a look now at a scene from the film. This is the scene where we really meet Ashraf as he's setting out on his journey to find terrorists and so on. We meet him for the first time here, don't we? Mm-hmm. Here it is.
She was dancing with her friends, and I was dancing with my friends. I was so happy.
I was giving my dad a kiss. My dad touched my hand like I'm proud of you.
Chaos and blood in the streets of Amman, Jordan tonight as explosions rip through 3 popular hotels.
Statement said the hotels were targeted because they are frequented by, quote, Jews and crusaders. And take a look at these photographs, a bride and groom celebrating what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives, just moments before a suicide bomber walked in and set off a huge explosion.
Unbelievable ending to a wedding party, isn't it?
Well, it's awful what happened to Ashraf and Nadia and their family, but what they're doing now, how Ashraf's speaking out around the globe, how he's dedicating his life to making sure it never happens again, I think just speaks so much to the bravery and the character of so many people around the globe who have been affected by terrorism.
And how did he get on in his attempt to talk to terrorists or talk to bombers? How did he get on?
Well, when you watch the film, which hopefully people will be able to see, whether online or on different networks around the globe, you'll see that there's a terrorist recruiter, a man whose job it is to find people who want to go blow themselves up and kill others. And that terrorist recruiter was happy to talk to our cameraman, to our director, but he wasn't willing to talk to Ashraf. And to me, that speaks volumes, that he can't even speak to the victims of his crime.
What about the Global Survivors Network, Carie? I mean, what would you like it to go on to do? What's the target?
Well, I always like to say that whenever you have any political party, there's always an opposition party, whether it's the Conservatives and Lib Dems with the Labour Party in the UK or the Democrats and the Republicans in America. We've got the terrorists out there. We'd like to be that opposition party. So whenever the terrorists have a statement or a video and the media's playing it and discussing it and going over all the motivations of the terrorists, we feel that they should also talk about the victims, the other side of the story. Talk about us, our loved ones, and instead of just saying 27 members of a family were killed or 42 people at a funeral were killed, those were all individuals with stories who had loved ones who are going to be in pain for the rest of their lives, and we want to have that be told. And so that's what Global Survivors Network is trying to do.
That's right. And the people who were killed, or as you said earlier, you would, if you were giving a speech, you would say the people who were murdered, to get that point across. And do you think there's any chance that there will be persuasion that will work with people who were thinking of being terror bombers, and can, by watching a film like this, perhaps be converted into not doing it, do you think?
Well, I'm hopeful, but I think what's most important is to get the discussion started, because so few people actually know what it's like to be a victim of terror. When I tell people that they found my mom's foot 5.5 years after her murder, and we continue to get pieces of her body to be located, people don't understand that that's what it is to be a terror victim. And we're lucky ones, because we actually live in a place where they continue to do the DNA analysis. When we start to tell the stories, we might not convince someone like Osama bin Laden to change his mind, but we might convince someone's mother or someone's sister or someone's cousin or uncle. And if they know that their loved one's going down this path of radicalization, they can maybe pull them apart and say, wait a second, you don't know what you're doing. Because a lot of people, when they're radicalized, they hear a very small view of the world. They don't see that their actions might kill their neighbor or their friend from high school. And that's what we need to do, is to show them the full picture and let them make their own decision. And what Global Survivors Network is doing is not trying to go after the grievances and say, yes, this grievance is correct or incorrect. We're just saying, whatever grievance you have, don't kill innocent people in order to address it.
Absolutely. The basic message, your basic message from the film. Well, good luck with the film, and hopefully we will see more progress in the near future. Thank you very much indeed. And that's it for this programme. My thanks to all my guests. Do join me again for the next packed edition of Frost Over the World, coming your way almost immediately.